Good morning, Mr. Maibek. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Chairperson.
Yes, are you ready?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Chairperson, this sitting of the Commission, as you know, involves the Transnet stream.
Yes.
We intend to lead evidence on 4 main topics. Firstly, the reinstatement of Mr. Gama as the Chief Executive of Transnet Freight Rail in 2011. Secondly, the settlement of litigation against Abalozi Risk Advisory Services, formerly known as GNS, in 2014. That is on pause at the moment, and we hope to bring that to evidence next week. Thirdly, corruption in relation to the manganese expansion project known as MEP in 2013. And then fourthly, some new and different evidence in part in relation to the acquisition of locomotives, in particular the 1064 locomotives. We intend to call these witnesses in relation to Mr. Gama's reinstatement, Mr. Mapoma, Mr. Todd and Mr. Mkhwanazi, in relation to Abalozi, Mr. Todd, in relation to MEP, Mr. Bester and Mrs. Stradham. We also would seek leave to present an affidavit from Mr. Bierman, who is in Australia. And then in relation to the locomotives, we intend to call Mr. Callard and Mr. Leher. Mr. Leher's evidence will also cover his Rule 3.4 application. Chairperson, in relation to the bundles, there have been 5 files that have been produced. If we were to run through them, bundle 1 and 2 contains what is referred to as Exhibit BB15. Now, Chairperson...
That is Transnet Bundle 01 and Transnet Bundle 02.
That is correct.
Okay.
That is Exhibit BB15, and those 2 files contain documentation relating to the Gama investigation. The first file is a series of affidavits. The second file is a series of key documents. Then Transnet Bundle 03 contains exhibits BB16, that being Mr. Mapoma's affidavits, and BB17, that being Mr. Todd's affidavits. Transnet Bundle 04A contains Exhibit 18, being Mr. Mkhwanazi's affidavit, 19, Mr. Bester's affidavit, 20, Mrs. Stradham's affidavit, and then also an Exhibit BB4F1. Now that appears out of sequence, but that was bundled before this proceedings, and that is part of the affidavits relating to Mr. Leher. And then the final file is Transnet Bundle 04B, and it contains 2 exhibits in relation to Mr. Leher, BB4F2, BB4F3, and Exhibit BB4H in relation to Mr. Callard. Mr. Chairperson, we intend to start with evidence relating to Mr. Gama's reinstatement. The facts, the background is probably well known to the public. Mr. Gama, as you recall...
Yes, but I think it might help to
Certainly.
just help the public to see where this fits in. Yeah.
Mr.
Just
Gama,
to give some
as you please. Mr. Gama was the Chief Executive of Transnet Freight Rail, a very big division of Transnet. And he was dismissed for serious misconduct in June of 2010. He referred an unfair dismissal dispute to the Transnet Bargaining Council. Chairperson, then came a change in the Minister of Public Enterprises from Mrs. Hogan to Mr. Gigaba, and the appointment of a new board of directors at Transnet. You will recall the evidence of Mrs. Hogan, which was in summary that former President Zuma was a devout supporter of Mr. Gama. There was a change in minister, a change in board. Within a few months of that, the new board decided to reinstate Mr. Gama with full retrospectivity and undertook and agreed to pay his costs. And that was a decision that was taken in February of 2011. Mr. Gama would go on to be appointed as the Group Chief Executive of Transnet. Mr. Mapoma was the General Manager, Group Legal Services. Mr. Todd was the attorney that represented Transnet in the Gama disciplinary proceedings and related litigation, and Mr. Mkhonazi was the new chairperson of the Board of Directors. With your leave, we would ask to call our first witness, Mr. Mapoma.
Well, maybe just to add on the background you have given, of course, I have the advantage that I've been here all along. I've had all the evidence. Just to emphasize that two things may be relevant before the dismissal of Mr. Gama. One is that his dismissal came about as a result of a disciplinary hearing that was chaired by an independent chairperson, senior counsel at the Johannesburg Bar. He was represented by lawyers at the disciplinary hearing. He was found guilty of, I think, 3 acts of misconduct. That is the one thing. The other thing is that prior to that, that is now in 2000, I think, and 9 and maybe early 2010, according to Ms. Hogan, who was Minister of Public Enterprises at the time, there was a vacant post for the Group Chief Executive Officer at Transnet, which was created after Ms. Maria Ramos had left, and Mr. Gama was a candidate together with other candidates. One of the candidates ultimately was Mr. Sipho Maseko, I think, and the board, which had conducted the interviews, recommended that Mr. Sipho Maseko should be appointed as the Group Chief Executive Officer. And they considered that Mr. Gama was not yet ready for such a position of responsibility. But also it happened that there were allegations that were being investigated or were about to be investigated against him relating to tender irregularities at Transnet. So, according to Ms. Hogan, when she presented to the former president, Mr. Zuma, the name of Mr. Sipho Maseko as the candidate who was recommended by the board, according to her, Mr. Zuma said that he had only one choice for the position of Group CEO for Transnet, and that choice was Mr. Gama. According to Ms. Hogan, when she said to Mr. Zuma, but the board has recommended somebody else, they think he is not, Mr. Gama is not ready, and also mentioned that there were investigations, or there were about to be investigations into certain allegations, serious allegations against Mr. Gama, which could lead to a disciplinary process. According to Ms. Hogan, Mr. Zuma said that then the position would have to wait and not be filled until those processes relating to Mr. Gama had been completed. Ms. Hogan says she tried to emphasize the need for the filling of the position, but she said Mr. Zuma was not prepared to change his view. Mr. Zuma has testified and has denied this evidence by Ms. Hogan, and said that he could not have adopted such an approach because if the board had gone through the processes, he would have gone along with that. But the position did remain unfilled until, I think, 2011. So when Mr. Gama was dismissed, the position was still not filled. It was then filled by Mr. Brian Molefe, I think early in 2011. I hope I'm right with regard to the year. Yeah, I think 2011. And then, as you said, in February, the new board of Transnet that had been appointed, I think in December or October, I'm not sure, then seems to have decided to reinstate Mr. Gama and concluded a certain settlement agreement with him. And he was reinstated with full back pay and benefits, as I understand the position. And the board undertook to pay certain costs to him. And then about 3 years later, I think in 2015, when Mr. Brian Molefe was seconded to ESCOM, Mr. Gama was made acting group CEO for Transnet. I thought I would use my benefit of having listened to all the evidence just to mention those fissures.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Okay, all right. Yes, you may call your first witness.
Thank you, Mr. Mapoma. Mr. Chairperson, I have mentioned that the bundles that are relevant to this witness are 1, 2, and 3. That's Exhibits 15 and Exhibit 16.
Will you be using them at the same time?
Yes, in certain respects we will.
Yeah, okay, all right. I think he will bring me 16. Or you know what, I think just do as you normally do. So what he will do, Mr. Mybeck, as you refer to another bundle, he will bring me that bundle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
I think administer the oath of affirmation.
Please state your full names for the record.
Siyabulela Mapoma.
Do you have any objection to taking the prescribed oath?
No.
Do you consider the oath to be binding on your conscience?
Yes.
Do you swear that the evidence will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing else but the truth? If so, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Thank you, Mr. Mapoma. You may be seated. Mr. Mybeck, my registrar has given me Transnet Bundle 1, but that one doesn't have Mr. Mapoma's statement. Should I
No,
have?
it should be bundle 03,
Yeah, okay.
containing Exhibit 16. Mr.
Thank you.
Mapoma, do you have bundle 3?
Yes.
Should be a tab in there, 16. Could I ask you to turn to that, please? As you please. Thank you, Chairperson. 2 pages or so into that bundle, you find an affidavit. I'm going to, as I've said to you, I'll refer to the black numbers. That's the page number in the bundle. So I'm referring here to page 3. Are you there?
Yes.
Is this an affidavit of yours?
Yes.
Could I please just ask you to turn to the end of that affidavit at page 14? Would you confirm that that is your signature and that you signed it under oath on the 31st of July this year?
Yes, I confirm that.
Now, there's a series of 3 affidavits in this exhibit. I'm going to take you, Mr. Mapoma, through them one by one. Let's start with this affidavit. You start off by saying that you are an advocate in private practice.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mybeck. Do you request that I admit this affidavit as Exhibit BB17? No, BB16. What we would do is admit each affidavit as an exhibit on its own.
Yes.
So that it's not the file that is the exhibit,
Absolutely.
it's the actual documents. And when we admit it, it would be the affidavit plus its annexures.
Perhaps, Mr. Chairperson, let me just go through, because there are 3 affidavits here.
Oh,
Perhaps I should
okay.
just deal with all of them and then
Okay.
ask you
Yes.
to admit all of them at once.
Yes, okay, that's fine.
So, Mr. Mapoma, you've dealt with your first affidavit, pages 3 through to 14, and would you confirm that it then included Annexure A, Annexure B at page 17, which ends at page 22. Would you confirm that?
Yes, I confirm, sir.
And then there is another affidavit starting at page 23. Is that your affidavit?
Yes, it is.
And could I ask you please to turn to page 28? Is that your signature?
Yes, it is my signature, sir.
And you attested to that affidavit under oath on the 31st of August this year.
Yes, I did.
And then at page 29, is that the commencement of your third affidavit?
Yes.
And could I please take you to page 32? Is that your signature?
Yes, it is mine. It
And
is.
did you attest to that affidavit under oath on the 8th of October?
Yes, I did.
That affidavit, I'd ask you to confirm, contains annexures SM1, starting at page 31, annexure SM2, starting at page, SM1 starting at 33, the black numbers,
Yes.
SM2 starting at page 36, and SM3 starting at page 39 and running until 42.
Yes, I confirm.
Mr. Chairperson, I would ask you then to admit those 3 affidavits together with the annexures making up Exhibit BB16.
I suggest that we don't make them all Exhibit BB 16, but rather that we make them Exhibit BB 16.1, 16.2,
Yes, it's,
16.3. Is
That's
that
been
all right?
pointed out to me by the Secretariat as per the index.
Yeah.
16.1, 16.2, 16.3,
Yeah.
as you please,
Yeah.
Mr. Chairperson.
The affidavit of Mr. Siyabulela Mapoma, starting at page 3, is admitted and will be Exhibit BB 16.1. Just guide me again in terms of when the next one starts, Mr.
The
Maita.
second affidavit, Chairperson, starts at page 23.
22.
23.
Oh. The affidavit of Mr. Siyabulela Mapoma, starting at page 23, is admitted as Exhibit BB 16.2. Okay.
The third affidavit starts at page 29, Chairperson.
The affidavit of Mr. Siyabulela Mapoma, starting at page 29, is admitted as Exhibit BB 16.3. Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Mpoma, could I ask you please to turn to page 3? Are you there?
Yes, I'm there.
You say at paragraph 1 that you are an advocate in private practice. Where do you practice? And what bars are you a member of?
I'm a member of the Peshawar Society of Advocates with its offices in East London, and I'm also a member of the Mtata Bar with its offices at Mtata, both in the Eastern Cape, so I practice in the Eastern Cape.
At paragraph 3, you deal with your work history at Transnet. Could you deal with that, please?
You want me to read from the paragraph? The paragraph reads, and which I confirm, I started working at Transnet on 1st February 2007 as a legal advisor, litigation and administrative law. Later, I was appointed as a general manager, group legal services, which position I occupied from the 1st of September 2008 to 31 January 2012. I was based at the Carlton Center, Johannesburg, which was the head office at the time. I resigned from Transnet to do pupillage at the Johannesburg Bar, after which I've been in practice since.
Now, just want to confirm then that you were General Manager, Group Legal Services, 2008 through to January 2012.
Yes,
The time of Mr. Gama's reinstatement in early 2011, you would have occupied this position.
yes.
Just 1 second, Mr. Maibek. I don't know, it looks like it's quite dark this side. I don't know if there is a lighting that is not there today, that is usually there. So, or whether there is a light that is not directed where it's normally directed. So if somebody can look at that. Yes, you may continue.
Thank you, Chairperson. Mr. Mpoma, in paragraph 4, you set out various positions of responsibility that you held whilst at Transnet. What were those?
Yes, Chair. I occupied other positions of responsibility at Transnet during my time there. I was a member of the Transnet Forensic Working Group, which was a subcommittee of Group Internal Control Committee. I was a member of the Crisis Committee, which was a committee under Group Risk. I also chaired the Transnet Acquisition Council for some time, although I'm not sure if this is the correct name of the committee, but I think at the time it was called the Transnet Acquisition Council. I also acted as CEO of Autopex P2 Ltd, which was then a subsidiary of Transnet for about 8 months, managing the transfer of Autopex to Prasa. During that time, I was doing both duties at Autopex and as a GM at Transnet. I I was also a trustee of Transnet. I was also a board member of a company called Gama Ltd, which was a company that Transnet had an interest in. And I know that I might have been in one or other committee, which I don't recall now.
And to whom did you initially report?
Initially, I reported to Mr. Vuyo Kahla, who was a member of EXCO. And when Mr. Kahla left, I then reported to Ms. Sola Stephen, who replaced Mr. Kahla as the group executive responsible for legal. I was reporting then to her.
So Ms. Stevens was the group executive legal.
Yes.
Then you go on in paragraph 6 to explain the request for information that was made on you by the Commission.
Yes.
Over the page, you then attach the letter as Annexure A, and then you quote paragraph 2 of the letter, paragraph 7 of your affidavit. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes, I did.
And it reads that in this regard, it seems prima facie strange that Transnet agreed to not only reinstate Mr. Gama, despite him having been found guilty of 3 serious acts of misconduct, but also that he was to be paid full back pay and Transnet was to pay 75% of his unsuccessful High Court application, 75% of his cost relating to his unfair dismissal dispute. It would seem that Transnet abandoned its costs that the High Court had ordered Mr. Gama to pay Transnet. I'll just ask you to confirm then it's those issues that you address in your affidavit.
Yes.
In paragraph 8, you then attach the draft settlement agreement concluded on the 23rd of February, where you say that you witnessed the signature of Mr. Mkhwanazi,
Yes, I did.
who at that time, what was his position?
At that time, Mr. Mkhwanazi occupied 2 positions at Transnet. He was the acting chief executive officer, and he was also chairman of the board.
Now, Mr. Mapoma, so as to give context to your evidence and to the other related witnesses, I'd like to take you to the settlement agreement that you attach as Annexure B to your affidavit. That you'll find at page 17 through to 22.
Yes, I'm there.
I'd just like to take you, please, to the preamble. It refers to the fact that an unfair dismissal dispute has arisen between the parties following the dismissal of Mr. Gama as the Chief Executive Officer, CEO of TRF on the 29th of June. Do you confirm that?
Yes, I confirm.
And that Mr. Gama then referred an unfair dismissal dispute to the Transnet Bargaining Council at 2.2?
Yes.
And 2.3 records that that dispute is now settled in terms of this agreement.
Yes.
3.1, Mr. Gama returned to Transnet with effect from 23 February 2011, and he's to resume his duties as CEO of TRF on 1 April 2011, some
Yes.
9 months after he was dismissed.
Yes.
3.2, any employment benefits that were due to him for the intervening period of 30 June 2010 to 23 February 2011 in terms of his employment contract should be deemed to be fully restored.
Yes. So it records.
And it goes on to record at 321, the full restoration of benefits entails, sub 1, payment of Mr. Gama's short-term benefits, they described, sub 2, payment of Mr. Gama's long-term benefits, and they described.
Yes.
Sub 3, restoration of Mr. Gama's salary, and that's described.
Yeah.
And then at 3.3, Mr. Gama is deemed to have served the 6 months final written warning. The final written warning will be deemed to have been effective from 29 June to 29 December 2010.
Yes.
This agreement, as you've said in your affidavit, was concluded on the 23rd of February 2011.
Yes, Chair.
Had that warning then lapsed by the time that the agreement was concluded?
Yes, by the look of paragraph 3.3, that warning had lapsed by the time the agreement was concluded.
And then a clause that's of particular relevance to your evidence, 3.5, Transnet will make a contribution equivalent to 75% of Mr. Gama's taxed legal costs incurred during Gama's High Court application and in respect of his unfair dismissal dispute referred to the Transnet Bargaining Council.
Yes.
3.6 deals with the time within which payment would be made. 3.7, the parties agreed to formulate a common statement.
Yes, I see that.
And then there are a number of boilerplate clauses, confidentiality, full and final settlement. And then under general, perhaps I could just direct your attention, please, to clause 6.4. The parties agree that the terms of the settlement agreement are in final settlement of any claims and disputes which each party to the agreement may have against the other in respect of Mr. Gama's employment as CEO of TFR. Confirm that.
I confirm that.
Let us then go back to your affidavit. At paragraph 9, you record that your recollection might not be perfectly accurate and that you may wish to put in a supplementary affidavit once you see any documents.
Yes, I do.
Well, let's then turn to paragraph 10. You deal with that?
Yes, at paragraph 10, Chair, I recorded that, and I still confirm it. That initially, when the disciplinary hearing of Mr. Gama was initiated, the matter was dealt with directly by Mr. Katla. He was not involved at all. And the reasoning, as I understood it at the time, was that Mr. Gama was an ex-com member, and it was not deemed appropriate that a junior member like myself should be directly involved in the disciplinary hearing of a senior executive. However, I know that initially Mr. Brian Pipak had been requested, had been briefed or consulted by Mr. Katla on Mr. Gama's disciplinary hearing.
Then at paragraph 11, you say that you were later informed that Mr. Todd of Bowman Gilfillan, known as Bowman's attorneys, handled the disciplinary matter. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Let's then turn to paragraph 12, where you say,
Mr.
coming to the matters...
I'm sorry, Mr. Mybeck. I would prefer if Mr. Mapoma, as far as you are able to, you just give your evidence and not read it. Obviously, you can look at your statement to refresh your memory because some of the details might need that. So Mr. Mybeck might see how to formulate his question so that you can respond in terms of your knowledge of your involvement. But obviously, when there is something, details that you need to look at, you can look at them.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, all right,
Thank you.
okay.
Now, at what point in time did you then become involved in the matter relating to Mr. Gama?
I came involved in this matter when Mr. Konaza joined Transnet.
And can you remember when that was, approximately?
I don't recall approximately, but I think it was in 2010 towards the end.
All right. And what had Mr. Gama taken any action or laid any complaints at that time that caused you to become involved in the matter?
Yes, Mr. Gama had laid a complaint with the public protector. He was alleging that he had been unfairly treated by Transnet. There are other allegations that were in that complaint, which the public protector was investigating. Now, complaints from the public protector at the time will come to my office. So this complaint also came to my office. Mr. Mkonazi came to know about it because I think it was reported in the various committees. It would have been reported at EXCO and it would have come to his attention. So I was dealing with that response that Transnet had to make to the public protector. There was a huge investigation. We had to get external service providers to assist us because of the number and the areas of investigation that were required to be done, so that we could have a comprehensive response to the public protector. Ultimately, then we did that. So this is, I think, the first time that I came to interact with Mr. Mkonazi on Mr. Gama.
Was that complaint laid by Mr. Gama after he had been dismissed or before he was dismissed? Do you remember?
I think he laid it after he was dismissed.
And he was dismissed at the end of June 2010?
2010, yes.
Yes, okay, all right.
Thank you. Mr. Mapoma, perhaps I could take you for the first time to Bundle 2, Exhibit BB15. Could I ask you, please, to turn up page 24.
Yes.
There is a letter from the Public Protector dated the 22nd of December 2010, addressed to Mr. Mkonazi.
Yes.
Headed Investigation Alleged Tender Irregularities and Abuse of Power at Transnet.
Yes.
Do you recall this document?
I recall this letter, but I've not seen it in a long time, but I do recall it.
Is this the Public Protector complaint that you've told the chairperson about?
This is the complaint I'm talking about, yes.
Now, if I could just ask you please to go to the second paragraph. The complaint alleged irregularities in procurement at Transnet, further that the then Transnet board had unfairly conspired to prevent Mr. Gama from successfully applying for the vacant post of Group Chief Executive,
Yes.
which was about to be vacated by Ms. Maria Ramos.
Yes.
In a meeting with him, Mr. Gama alleged that the motive for his suspension could only have been to scupper his chances of successfully applying for the post as seen from the following. And so the letter goes on.
Yes.
Now, you mentioned that in dealing with the Public Protector complaint, you engaged certain service providers. Who were those?
We engaged the services of Nkongisizwe. We engaged the services of Norton Rose. One of the partners there at the time, Mr. Kule, was assisting us in responding to the complaint.
And
We
did you
also, I think at the time, also engaged the services of Senior Counsel, Advocate Nzabaza SC. So I know that we had those service providers with us.
And did you then, in the fullness of time, did Transnet respond to the Public Protector complaint?
Yes, Transnet did respond to this complaint in time. I remember, I think I took it myself to the Public Protector's office in Pretoria before the due date or on the due date, but we did respond to it.
So if I can direct your attention to paragraph 13 of your affidavit, you said, we ultimately provided the response to the Public Protector. You say you don't know what happened to the complaint. Could I, in relation to the response, ask you please to turn to page 48 of the same bundle, bundle 2.
Did you say 48, Mr. Maybeck?
Yes, Chairperson, 48.
Okay.
Mr. Mapoma, there you see a letter addressed to the Public Protector And if you turn forward then at page 55, you will see that it appears to have been signed by Mr. Mkhwanazi
Yes,
on behalf of Transnet on the 30th of June 2011.
yes.
Was this the response that you speak of?
This is the response that I speak of. But I think the response had certain attachments to it.
Yes.
But I'm not sure, but this would be the response that I speak of.
Now, were you aware of the fact that Mr. Gama had referred an unfair dismissal dispute to the Transnet Bargaining Council?
Yes, I'm aware. It was after the dismissal of Mr. Gama, such a referral was then made.
Now, I want to deal with your interaction with Mr. Mkhwanazi. When he initially interacted with you, what did he tell you? What did he want you to do?
Mr. Mkhwanazi told me that I needed to assist him to bring Mr. Gama back to Transnet at the time. And I advised my immediate supervisor about this. And she had no problem with Mr. Mkhwanazi working with me on this. In relation to what I mentioned earlier, that Mr. Gama had been a senior executive at Transnet, and my supervisor was on the same par with Mr. Gama. So Mr. Mafika Mkhwanazi then asked me to assist him to do this, to bring Mr. Gama back to Transnet.
I just wanted to clarify something. Why did you, when you say you informed your supervisor, you're referring, I understand, to Ms. Stephen?
I'm referring to Ms. Sola Stephen, yes.
Why did you find it necessary to speak to her about this?
I found it necessary because normally, from where Mr. Mkhwanazi's position was at CEO, CEOs will normally interact with the group executive responsible for legal, and then I will get the instruction from my executive. So in this instance, Mr. Mkhwanazi wanted to talk to me directly, and he wanted me to assist him directly and not through my supervisor, Ms. Stephen. So I had to inform her because I did not want to have any tensions in the office about why would the chairman of the board, why would the CEO be interacting with me directly instead of her.
Now, when you first were approached by Mr. Mkhwanazi in this regard, was that before or after the board resolved to reinstate Mr. Gama?
At the time that Mr. Mkhwanazi first approached me, I think his instruction was that the board had resolved already to do it. But I'm not certain at the time, but I was aware that he had the authority to do the reinstatement, either from the board or from elsewhere.
Now, were there times before the settlement agreement was concluded that you attended meetings relevant to the reinstatement of Mr. Gama?
Yes. I had a number of meetings with Mr. Mkhwanazi himself, where he would tell me how he wanted to do this. And his words at the time was that he wanted to do this cleanly, in light of the fact that Mr. Gama had been dismissed. So he wanted to do the reinstatement cleanly. And I use this word cleanly because it's a word that he used with me. So we had a number of meetings with him. We also had a number, that is Mr. Gule and myself, we had a number of meetings with Mr. Langa, who were Mr. Gama's attorneys at the time. There was a meeting as well where there was Mr. Gama, Mr. Langa, there was myself, Mr. Gule, and one of his associates at the time, Mr. Sangoni, which was held at Inanda on a weekend. We arrived there in the morning, we had a caucus, Mr. Mafika, Gule, myself, and Sangoni on the side, and then later on, Mr. Mkhwanazi went to meet Mr. Gama separately in another room where we were not. I personally did not meet Mr. Gama, but I would meet Mr. Mkhwanazi very regularly about this thing.
And what did Mr. Mkhwanazi report to you about that meeting at Inanda?
At the meeting of Inanda, Mr. Mkhwanazi told us that he could not agree with Mr. Gama on a number of things. One of the things that Mr. Gama wanted at the time, according to Mr. Mkhwanazi, was that he wanted to be reinstated as CEO of Transnet. And Mr. Mkhwanazi was refusing with this. There was also the issue of the bonuses at the time, but the specific thing I recall was that Mkhwanazi was refusing that Gama must be reinstated as CEO. He, Mkhwanazi, had been proposing that Gama must go back to Transnet Freight Rail, or he must come and work as a group executive in his own office, that is at the chairman's office. But the main thing at the time was the return of Mr. Gama as CEO of Transnet that Mr. Mkhwanazi was not agreeing to.
Just to go back to the first time that Mr. Mkhwanazi asked you to assist him, did you say that he asked you to assist him to bring back Mr. Gama to Transnet?
Yes.
That's how he put it.
That's how he put it. He said we need to reinstate Mr. Gama
Yes.
back to Transnet.
And your understanding is that at that time when he approached you, the board had already resolved to reinstate Mr. Gama.
That is how I understood it at the time, yes.
Yes. But there was no settlement agreement concluded as yet.
There was no settlement agreement, there was no detail
Yes.
on the terms of the reinstatement.
Yes.
So I had no detail at all.
Yes. Now, this resolution of the board, which you seem to say seems to have been made before the settlement agreement was concluded, did you ever see that resolution, or did you hear from Mr. Mkhwanazi that there was such a resolution?
No,
You never saw it?
I never saw it.
But did Mr. Mkhwanazi say that the board had already resolved to reinstate Mr. Gama, or are you not sure about that?
He did say so.
Yes.
Because at the time, I understood that he had a mandate to talk to Mr. Gama. He had a mandate to agree to terms with Mr. Gama, the details of which he would have received from the board, I suppose. And at the time, my advice to him was this: because Mr. Mkhwanazi, you are acting CEO, you're also chairman of the board, there might be some conflict somewhere, and you have no authority to reinstate Mr. Gama to be CEO of Transnet, because it's the board that must make that decision. So my interactions with him at the time were always to say that whatever it is that you do, terms that you agree with and so on, make sure that the board agrees to this, because it is the board that has the power to do this. It is the board that has the power, even if which will have to answer if there's some answering that needs to be done at some stage. So that was my kind of advice that I would be giving him, that the board at all times must be the one that makes the decisions on this thing.
Was your understanding at the time that Mr. Mkhwanazi approached you that the board had or may have had made a resolution in principle that Mr. Gama should be reinstated without, at that stage, talking about the terms under which he should be reinstated?
So it might have been an in principle understanding, but I never asked him for a board resolution or anything like that.
Yeah.
But I understood that he had the authority
To
do what he asked me to assist him with.
Could it be that he said to you something to the effect that the board had given him a mandate or authority to negotiate a settlement with Mr. Gama, which would include a reinstatement, or to negotiate Mr. Gama's reinstatement? Is it possible that he might have put it more or less along those lines?
That is possible.
Okay, all right.
That is possible. And I also understood that at the time he also had instructions from elsewhere to do this, because we interacted with him quite a lot.
Yes.
And we got used to each other, and I was comfortable to ask him certain questions, but not certain questions, because he was still my senior, so you have to defer
Yes.
and have some sort of deference to him. So you don't ask him certain things. But the understanding will be clear that Mr. Gama must be reinstated, and he needed to do it cleanly.
Yes. Now you say that you understood or he had instructions from somewhere. Do you want to elaborate on that? Did he say he had been instructed, or what is the position? I
Yes, he
heard you
did say. So.
make a reference to that. Can you just tell me?
He did say that he was under instruction to do it as well.
Under instructions to do what?
To reinstate Mr. Gama.
To reinstate Mr. Gama.
Yes.
Did you ask him who had instructed him?
No, I never asked him. But in our interactions,
Yes.
At various times, I would be made to understand that the instructions came from the presidency.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Now, when you say that, you're not saying specifically in relation to the instructions, but you're talking in relation to other matters relating to Mr. Gama?
I'm talking in relation to the reinstatement of Mr. Gama.
In regard to the reinstatement of Mr. Gama.
Yes.
So the discussions you had with him were to the effect that on the reinstatement of Mr. Gama, the understanding was that the instructions came from the former president.
Yes, and that the board had made that decision as well.
And the board had
Yes.
given him a mandate.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Mr. Maybeck?
Thank you, Chairperson. You were speaking about a meeting that you held at Inanda.
Yes.
Is that the meeting that you deal with at paragraph 19 of your affidavit, page 8?
Yes, that is the meeting that I'm referring to at paragraph 19.
I take it then that that meeting would have happened before the settlement agreement was concluded.
Yeah.
The meeting happened before the settlement agreement was concluded.
Yes, I agree.
Elsewhere in your affidavit, you talk of a meeting held in the Magaliesburg area. Can you just explain?
Maybe, Mr. Maybeck, before you go there, what was the purpose of that meeting at Inanda?
The purpose of that meeting was for Mr. Mkwanazi to sit with Mr. Gama and thresh out the details of a settlement agreement between Transnet and Mr. Gama.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yes.
Yes, continue, Mr. Maybeck.
You also make reference to a meeting in the Magaliesburg area.
Yes.
You deal with that meeting, please?
I'm just looking for the paragraph so that I just remind myself. But I know that there was a meeting that was held. It was an EXCO meeting. And my understanding at the time was that because the board had made this decision, Mr. Mkwanazi now had to brief EXCO on the decision that had been made by the board, because he was also chairing EXCO. So he had now to brief the EXCO members. That was my understanding of that. But I did not sit inside the meeting.
EXCO being the EXCO of Transnet,
The EXCO of
senior
Transnet,
management,
the senior management of
executives.
Transnet, which was comprised by various people, mainly the CEOs of the various divisions of Transnet.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
Now, in paragraph 21 and further, you go on to explain your involvement in the payment of legal fees.
Yes.
So this is now obviously at a time after the conclusion of the settlement agreement.
Yes.
And you've told and highlighted for the chairperson the provision of clause 3.5 of the settlement agreement.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Mr. Maybeck. I may be mistaken. But I thought that when, or rather during or around the Magaliesburg meeting,
Yes.
that there was an occasion when Mr. Mkwanazi met with Mr. Gama alone, which he knew about. I don't know whether that was a different one or that's a reference to the Inanda meeting.
Yes.
But if it's a different meeting, I would like to hear more about it. Was there one meeting where Mr. Mkwanazi had a one-on-one meeting with Mr. Gama, or were there two?
In my presence, there was one meeting where Mr. Gama and Mr. Mkonazi met. This was the Inanda meeting
Okay.
where I was, but they met separately in some other room, and we
Yes.
were in some other room.
Yes,
At
yes.
the Makhalisbek meeting, Mr. Gama was not there.
Oh, okay.
Yes, Mr. Mkonazi informed me that he wanted to brief EXCO there as to the board decision and what was happening with the reinstatement and so on and so on. So
Oh, okay.
that's what he wanted me to do.
Oh,
But he asked me to come to be there so that if he needed me for something,
yes.
he would then call me to, I don't know whether to explain to EXCO where we were with this thing, as Transnet, but I was not an EXCO member, so I was
Yes.
not attending the meeting, but I was at the venue,
Yes.
but not inside.
Yeah, well, maybe he might have needed you in case there were legal
Yes.
aspects to be explained to EXCO.
Yes.
So, okay, I may have misunderstood when I thought there were two such meetings.
Yes,
Okay.
and I also use Makhalisbek very cautiously because I'm not familiar with that side, but it was out of Johannesburg,
Yes.
in the Makhalisbek area. I
okay.
might not
You might not be
as to
accurate about
about the
Mahalisburg.
name Makhalisbek,
Yeah,
because there are a
okay.
number of venues
Yes.
in that area, and we were in one of them.
Okay, no,
Yeah.
that's fine. But because Mr. Maibek is going to take you to the time when you deal with payments, if we go back to the meeting in Inanda, you say Mr. Mkwanazi wanted to have a meeting with Mr. Gama where it would just be the two of them,
Yes,
and that is what happened.
that is what happened.
And when, after that meeting, did Mr. Mkwanazi brief you about the discussion or some aspects of the discussion?
Yes, it did.
Yeah, and which aspects were those?
The one that I remember specifically is the one about where Mr. Gama would be reinstated to.
Yes,
Mr. Gama had been asking from Mkonazi to be reinstated as CEO of the group, Transnet Group. And Mafiga Mkonazi was refusing that. He wanted to reinstate him at TFR, as CEO at TFR.
so the position is that there was a pending unfair dismissal dispute in terms of which Mr. Gama sought to be reinstated in his position as CEO of TFR. But at that meeting, according to Mr. Mkwanazi, in terms of what he told you, Mr. Gama was no longer seeking reinstatement to the position at TFR,
Yes,
but he was in effect seeking to be appointed Group CEO of Transnet.
yes, Chair.
And that's a position he did not hold before.
That is the position that he did not hold before, and this was the position that Mafiga Mkonazi was not agreeing to.
And Mr. Mkwanazi did not agree to that.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Mr. Maibek.
Thank you, Chairperson. So I was going to, let me take you to paragraph 21 and further of your affidavit where you now deal with your involvement in trying to resolve the issue of legal costs. Is that correct?
Yes.
How did you become involved in that?
Okay. After the settlement agreement was then signed, the reinstatement now became effective, as it were. Although it had a date that Mr. Gama was going to start working in April somewhere. But there was the issue now of the payment of Mr. Gama's legal fees. The legal fees were in respect of his dispute, the labor dispute, up to the referral to the bargaining council. That's my understanding of it. And before the disciplinary hearing started, Mr. Gama had issued an application with the High Court seeking to stop the disciplinary hearing from going ahead. So the court ruled against him, and Transnet was given a cost order in its favor. Now, Mr. Gama had incurred costs there. Transnet had incurred costs there. And it is Transnet who was supposed to have been paid its legal costs. And lawyers, the Transnet representatives were instructed accordingly to recover those costs from Mr. Gama. Now, on the bargaining council matter, Mr. Gama had incurred costs and Transnet had incurred costs as well there. And Transnet wanted to recover its costs from that process as well. However, the settlement agreement now said something different. It changed what was normal and asked Transnet to contribute 75% of Mr. Gama's legal costs that he had incurred at these two processes. And there was a date that it must be done within 14 days after he had presented certain documentation.
So the settlement agreement, in terms of the settlement agreement, Transnet undertook to pay 75% of Mr. Gama's costs in regard to the High Court application that Mr. Gama had brought against Transnet,
Yes,
which he had lost,
yes,
and the High Court had ordered him to pay Transnet's costs.
yes,
So, but in the settlement agreement, Transnet undertook to pay him 75% of his costs in regard to that application.
Chair, the wording of the agreement on this aspect needs to be interpreted very carefully. Firstly, the 75% will be 75% of taxed costs, not 75% of the costs, but they should be taxed first. And these were costs that he had incurred. So there was the actuality that must have happened, that he must have incurred these costs. Now what happened?
Yes, of course, you know, when they say, or when an order says you are to pay somebody's costs, it's always understood that those costs are either agreed or taxed. So, so if there's agreement, there's no issue. But
Yes.
if there's no agreement, then they've got to be taxed. Yeah.
The agreement, the term of the agreement was specific.
A specific that
Yeah,
it should
that they
be
must be
taxed.
taxed.
Oh, okay,
Yes.
okay.
Now, subsequent to that,
Okay, let's finish with regard to what Transnet undertook to pay in terms of costs. In regard to the High Court litigation that Mr. Gama had brought, which he had lost, and he had been ordered by the High Court to pay Transnet costs, the settlement agreement said it was, they said Transnet undertook to pay his taxed costs in
Yes.
regard to that application. And then it said, Transnet also undertook to pay 75% of his taxed costs in relation to the unfair dismissal matter.
Chair, with your permission,
Yeah.
so that I don't misquote this.
Yes,
At page 19 of Exhibit 17, PP 17, which is the third bundle,
yes,
which is an annex charge in my affidavit.
yes, that's where the settlement agreement is, yeah.
Now, what is relevant is paragraphs 3.5 and 3.6.
Yeah,
3.5 reads, Transnet will make a contribution equivalent to 75% of Mr. Gama's taxed legal costs incurred during Gama's High Court application and in respect of his unfair dismissal dispute referred to the Transnet Independent Council. 3.6, Transnet undertakes that such contribution towards the legal costs incurred by Gama will be made within a period of 14 days after submission by Gama of the relevant supporting documents.
yes, yes.
So this is what I was asked to implement after this agreement was concluded. And there were huge problems that then emanated from this.
Well, before you talk to me about what happened when you were asked to implement, let me ask this question. This agreement, this issue of the legal costs, the undertaking by Transnet to pay Mr. Gama's legal costs, tax legal costs, or contribution to his legal costs in regard to the High Court application is very unusual.
Yes.
Actually, I've never, in my experience of many, many years, heard of a party undertaking to contribute to the costs of the other party who lost in a case against that party, and that other party had been ordered to pay this party's costs. I've never heard of anything like that. So it's very unusual. Now, what I want to find out is, you being in the legal department of Transnet, and you being somebody that Mr. Mkhwanazi had been taking along to some meetings relating to Mr. Gama, were you asked to advise on any of the terms of this settlement agreement, including the issue of costs, to give advice whether Transnet should agree to any such terms?
How this process, Chair, as I recall it, depended was like this. When Mr. Mkhwanazi interacted with me, or with Gule and so on, or with me even individually, he will not say, this is a term I want to include in the settlement. He will chat about options and that he had, and I would advise him. He will not say specifically, this is what I want in the agreement. Must I put it there? Do you say yes or no? Do you recommend that I should put it there or no? He will not do it like that. He will be very general with how he interacted with us. And you will not even know that this is something that will end up in an agreement of this nature. Now, in respect of legal costs, I never advised him to put that agreement in, and he never asked me. But later on, I learned that Transnet had agreed to this, to this. I will never have advised
Never
him to do this.
have I advised
I
the
agree with
Transnet
you,
to-
it is unusual.
Yes.
I've never heard of it myself
Yes.
at the time, and even now. I had never heard of it.
Yes.
And when now the bill came, it was within 14 days they had to give us these documents supporting what they said we must pay. They came with a long bill of costs, which was 55 pages long, which was in excess of 12 million, and I refused to pay it at the time. And there were a lot of interactions subsequently, which I've referred to in the affidavits. I don't want to preempt my counsel.
Yes, he will take you
He
to
will
those.
take me
Yes,
there.
yeah.
We'll get there, but then a lot of problems then started with how this was interpreted.
Okay, would you have known if Mr. Mkhwanazi sought and obtained advice from some attorneys on whether to include these terms about costs in the settlement agreement, or you might not have known?
I will not know, sir.
You would not know.
I will not have known.
Okay, all right. I interrupted you when you were dealing with Mr. Mybeck's question about implementation.
Yes,
So,
thank you,
Mr. Mybeck, you
Chairperson.
can take it from there.
Mr. Mapoma, I'm going to deal with the actual payments that were made when we deal with your second affidavit, because there they set out. But I just wanted to pick up from paragraph 22 and further of your affidavit. You've already mentioned to the chairperson that you received a 55-page bill of costs. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And from whom did you receive that?
We received it from Mr. Langa, who was Tambalanga attorneys who were representing Mr. Gama at the time.
And what was the total amount of that bill?
It was in excess of 12 million rand.
And what view did you form in relation to the bill?
I formed the view that it was ridiculous. There were a lot of falsities in it, inaccuracies. I went through it very carefully, and on the face of it, prima facie, it was ridiculous. I told Mr. Langa that I was refusing to pay it. There were a number of things that I pointed out to him at the time. How they calculated distances, for instance, how they calculated the time of consultations. It just didn't make sense to me at the time. So I refused to pay it outright.
And you mentioned later on in your affidavit that there was a point where you indicated to Mr. Langa that you might report him to the Law Society. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. That is correct, because he was insisting that we must pay this money. And at the time, there's correspondence, there are phone calls there's pressure to pay the money. And I did say to him, look, this bill is overreaching, and I have a good sense to report you to the Law Society, but I never reported at the time.
And did you ever receive a letter from Mr. Langa in relation to this issue?
Yes, Mr. Langa sent me a letter, which was very insulting. He was accusing me of many things, that I was under transformation, I was refusing to assist black people. He was saying that because I had a cushy job at Transnet, I thought I knew everything, and so on and so on. So it was a letter that was full of insults, which annoyed me greatly at the time.
I want to turn to another topic, and I'll come back perhaps to the issue of costs when concluding this affidavit. But in your affidavit, you refer to a Mr. Siyabulela.
Yes.
Who is he?
Siyabulela was a special advisor to the Minister of Public Enterprises at the time, Minister Gama.
And did you have any dealings with Mr. Mhlangu around this time?
Yes, in the reinstatement of Mr. Gama and whatever was happening, I received a call from him in the evening, going home, and he was questioning the delay that Transnet was accusing Transnet of delaying the reinstatement of Mr. Gama, and sort of attributing this delay to me at the time. And he was not angry or anything, but he was just raising it to me as a concern that he had, that the ministry had, to say that Transnet is delaying this, and I should make it a point that things are speeded up.
Right.
And he called me 2 times. He called me once, and I told him that this is not my responsibility. I'm merely assisting Mr. Mkhwanazi to do what he says I must do. The last conversation we had, I was a bit stern with him and told him not to call me again because I did not report to him or his minister or to the president, so he must stop calling me. And he never called me again. They have not spoken to Siyabulela since.
I'm sorry, you made a reference to the president and the minister, but I didn't hear what you were saying about them.
Yes, I told him the second time that he must not call me again about this issue of Mr. Gama, because I'm not answerable to him. That is Mr. Mhlangu. I was also not answerable to the minister. I was also not answerable to the president.
Okay.
So he must not call me about this and speeding up of things and so on. They need to talk to Mr. Mkhwanazi if they have to talk about anything relating to Mr. Gama. So this was not something that I had to answer to them at all.
Well, why did you refer to the minister and the president when you said that to him?
Yes, because Mr. Mhlangu had indicated to me that there was a concern of the delay from the presidency and from the minister. And what was strange to me is that he, even if there was that delay from them, but I didn't think that he had the authority or the right to attribute any delay to me.
Okay.
So this was my annoyance with him at the time,
Yes.
which I
Yes.
explained to him.
Okay.
So, did Mr. Mhlangu refer to the president, or did he refer to some other term?
He referred to the presidency, but he didn't say the president.
What did he say?
He would use a language that made you understand that he was referring to the president.
What language?
Let me see my affidavit, because I think in my affidavit I did mention this.
Yeah, you can refresh your memory on your
Yes.
affidavit if you...
I'll ask you to go to paragraph 27, please, at page 12.
Yes, he referred to number 1,
That you understood to mean
that I
the president.
understood, yes. And this was not, the involvement of the president in Transnet things was not strange to me because we had previously received a complaint from the presidency about some litigation matter that we had. Someone who had sued Transnet, alleging that they delivered some wheels at Transnet Rail Engineering, suing Transnet for 8 million plus. And we defended this claim at the time. We briefed Advocate Mutau, and we investigated and found that no wheels were ever delivered. But the plaintiff at the time was insisting that he must be paid and laid complaints up to the presidency. And the presidency wrote us a letter, which I had to answer. So to me, there was nothing new about queries coming from the presidents about what Transnet was doing.
Do you remember who the plaintiff was in the matter that you are?
I can find out because I know the specifics.
Yes.
Of the particulars of claim. At the
Yes.
time.
But
I forget
what was the gist of the president's letter or
The
complaint?
gist, Chair, sorry to interrupt, was that why were we not settling the matter?
Is that what the letter was saying?
Yes, why was the matter not being settled? And at the time, this was a matter that was also reported to at the board, because we had a legal report that we did for litigation matters, which I would hand to my supervisor to take and table at EXCO. It will be a report about litigation at Transnet. And this matter, including some of the bigger matters at Transnet, also became part of reports that we will now have to make for the board itself. But ultimately, that matter was settled because the plaintiff withdrew the case on the day of trial at the High Court here in Johannesburg. Because we totally decided that we're not going to pay.
Or did you say that this was a case where the plaintiff was supposed to have delivered some goods to Transnet?
He alleged that he did, Chair.
And he alleged, or it alleged that it had delivered the goods,
Yes.
but your investigations at Transnet revealed that no such goods had been delivered.
Yes.
And he was claiming payment for those goods.
Yes, Chair.
And you defended the matter.
Yes, Chair.
Then there was a letter from the president
Yes.
asking why you were not settling the matter.
Yes.
Despite that letter, you did not settle the matter. You continued to fight it.
Yes.
And then ultimately the plaintiff withdrew the claim.
Yes, on the morning of the trial.
Yes, without Transnet paying anything.
Without Transnet paying anything.
Yes, okay, all right.
Thank you, Chairperson. It's to,
I see we are at 17 past 11. Let's take the the tea break. We'll resume at 25 to 12.
Thank you.
Jen. Okay, let's continue.
Mr. Chairperson, I've been asked by the Secretariat to bring to your attention a letter, I don't know if you've been given a copy, from MPM attorneys representing Abalozi.
Oh, okay. I haven't seen it.
Perhaps
Okay. So,
if I could hand it up.
yes, okay.
Mr. Chairperson, in sum, it seems that what happened here is that a 3-3 was served on Abalozi. You remember they were previously called GNS, and they were provided with a 3-3 in relation to Mr. Todd's affidavit dealing with GNS. They write to you effectively saying that what Mr. Todd says in his affidavit is privileged. They say it's unuseful. At paragraph 3, that it simply is his opinion, it's a legal memorandum, and it appears, want a ruling from you that the affidavit must either be knocked out or that they don't have to respond to it. I don't think this is something that needs to be dealt with now, subject to your view.
Yeah, if they want to come and move any application, they should do so. Yeah.
As you please, Chairperson. Mr. Mapoma, before the tea adjournment, you had dealt with your interaction with Mr. Mhlangu. I just want to go back and ask you, did you know Mr. Mhlangu?
Yes, I'd known him before.
And how do you know him?
Oh, Mr. Mhlangu had been a partner at a firm of attorneys, Gama or Chimbilani Mhlangu. Might not be naming it correctly, but they were a member of the Transnet legal panel. Subsequently, they merged, again, I don't know whether I'm using the right word, with Edward Nathan Sonnenbergs, and he was a director at Edward Nathan Sonnenbergs. So he would visit me at times regarding legal work that his firms of attorneys were engaged in with Transnet.
And Mr. Mhlangu, does he hail from the Eastern Cape?
Not to my knowledge. But I know that he was friends with somebody I knew from the Eastern Cape, was familiar I knew.
Now, you've told the chairperson about your discussions with Mr. Mhlangu and what you said to him the last time that he phoned you.
Yes.
Did you report on that discussion that you had with Mr. Mhlangu to anybody?
Yes, I did.
To whom did you report?
I informed Mr. Mkonas of the conversation the following morning. And the reason for that was I was worried that Mr. Mhlangu might report our conversation to his minister, and the minister might call Mr. Mr. Mkonazi to complain that I had not spoken, well with Mr. Mhlangu or something like that. So I thought I should forewarn Mr. Mkonazi that there was this conversation between me and Mhlangu, and this is how I responded to him.
And you did that?
I did that.
Then if we go back to affidavit at page 12.
I'm sorry, when you did that, what was Mr. Mkwanazi's reaction to that report by you?
No, he really didn't do anything. There was nothing to be done. I think he just took note of it.
You just wanted him not
I just
to be
wanted him to be
surprised
aware.
if he got a call.
If you got a call about my conversation,
Okay,
there was that conversation that had happened.
Okay, all right.
Thank you. If you go back to your affidavit at page 12, you deal with that discussion at paragraph 28. And then at paragraph 29, you deal with the settlement agreement. We've dealt with that. And just a few things to finish off this affidavit. I can come to the second one. You've already told the chairperson, Mr. Mapoma, about a letter that you received from Mr. Langa
Yes.
Did you ever bring that letter to the attention of anyone within Transnet?
Yes, I showed it to my colleagues. I showed it to Ms. Stephen, who was my supervisor at the time, and asked her, to intervene on my behalf and talk to Mr. Gama about this. Because the letter was very unsavory times. And in my view, it was tantamount to me being insulted by one of the executives. Because a letter from his attorneys, in my mind, is a letter from him. So I showed it to Ms. Stephen at the time and asked her to intervene, because executives should not be dealing like this with me and with anybody else. I thought it was very wrong.
So you are saying the letter was from Langa attorneys,
Yes.
who were Mr. Gama's attorneys,
Yes,
but because they represented Mr. Gama,
yes,
you took what they were saying
yes,
as coming from Mr. Gama,
yes,
and you reported it to your senior,
yes,
so that she could take it up with Mr. Gama?
yes.
Oh, okay.
And at this time, had Mr. Gama been reinstated?
Yes, Mr. Gama was back at work at the time.
And what was the reaction of Ms. Stevens?
She laughed at me.
Eh?
She laughed.
She laughed. Did she read the letter?
Yes, she did.
And you said the letter was quite insulting as far as we were concerned.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Mapoma, was there a time where other employees of Transnet spoke to you about Mr. Gama's costs?
Yes.
I'm sorry again, Mr. Mybeck. Maybe just to conclude. Ms. Stevens laughed after reading the letter, and that was the end of her involvement on the issue? Or was there some discussion that followed between the two of you after she had left?
Nothing, sir.
What was your understanding of her reaction?
She did not see the significance of it.
She didn't see the seriousness of the
Yeah.
issue. Okay, and you left it at that?
I left it at that.
Okay, all right. Mr. Mybeck.
Thank you, Chair. I'd asked you whether there were other employees of Transnet who approached you in relation to Mr. Gama's costs?
Yes, I was approached as well at different times by Ms. Cleopatra Shekela and Mr. Kenneth Dietrich at different times, who came to my office and discuss this issue of Mr. Gama's legal fees that I was refusing to pay. And I also explained to them at the times that were there my reasoning at the time. So they did come to my office to ask about this.
What was your understanding of where they came into the matter of Mr. Gama's costs?
So they were colleagues.
In legal language, what was their locus standi on the matter?
They had no local standing in legal language, but they were colleagues. We got on very well together. And at the time, I took no affront by them coming to inquire. I just explained to them.
And that's how it ended?
And that's how it ended.
Okay, all right. Yes, Mr. Mybeck?
Thank you. And then the last two paragraphs of your affidavit, you say that Mr. Molefe was then appointed as the CEO. He never asked me about legal fees of Mr. Gama.
Yes. Yes, Mr. Molefe then came in, and he never interacted with me on this, except when there was a query from the ministry, Public Enterprises Ministry, about Mr. Gama's fees. And he just simply wrote a note on a memo pad that I must draft a response for him to the ministry, which I did.
And then perhaps I can just ask you two questions. Were you, and you might have already dealt with this, were you involved yourself in negotiating the settlement agreement with Mr. Gama?
No, I've never met Mr. Gama. I've never interacted with him at all. If I would meet him in the lift, perhaps it would be the obligatory greeting, but I absolutely had no interactions with him at all.
I want now, Mr. Mapoma, to take you please to your second affidavit. That you find at page 23 and further.
Before that, Mr. Mybeck, I know that you have said that you had no part in negotiating the settlement agreement.
Yes.
Yeah. But you held a senior position in the legal department of Transnet. And Transnet, part of your job was to give legal advice to Transnet, is that right?
Yes.
Yes. Now, when you did see the settlement agreement and you saw its terms, you obviously saw that one of the terms was that Mr. Gama, I think, was being given a final written warning, which was valid for 6 months, but retrospectively, the settlement agreement was being concluded on the 23rd of February 2011. That warning was said to have commenced on the 29th of June, is that right?
Yes.
2010.
Yes.
And therefore would have expired on the 29th or 28th of December 2010.
Yes.
Did you have an understanding of what that part of the settlement agreement meant at a practical level? Are you able to say something, being a legal advisor to Transnet, knowing that you were not asked for your opinion, but seeing that, did you take a view about what it meant to have that kind of clause in the settlement agreement?
Well, at the time, in my view, it was, my understanding was that Mr. Gama could come back to work immediately.
Yes. But to the extent that the settlement agreement said the warning would have been valid for 6 months, it did not mean that by the time the settlement agreement was signed, there was no warning anymore.
It would mean that the sanction had been served, as it were.
Yes, yes.
Yes, and
even before the settlement.
even before the settlement.
Yes.
Because at the Bargaining Council, as I understood this thing at the time, was that Mr. Gama was not complaining about the actual finding of guilt. He was complaining about the sanction itself. So if now the finding of guilt stands, and then the sanction has been made the way it was, it meant that the matter was finalized and you could come back to work.
Yes.
Without the matter going to the Bargaining Council for it to determine
Yes.
the sanction that they've been given.
Yes.
So Transnet took it upon itself to decide on the sanction, as it were, because the sanction had been decided by Anthropos SC, was chairing the disciplinary hearing. So they sought to review or amend that, I suppose, without it going to any form of formal legal process, like the Bargaining Council, for instance. So this is what they had decided to do.
At a practical level, did it mean that there was any risk to Mr. Gama in any way of this warning being taken into account if there was, he committed another misconduct after he came back, or as far as you know?
Though, as I'm sitting here, Chair, there would have been no risk.
There would have been no risk.
Yes.
Yes. Had there been any settlements before in relation to dismissal disputes at Transnet, which had been settled on a basis where a warning was given, but it had lapsed before the settlement happened?
Not to my knowledge.
Not to your knowledge?
Yes, because matters like this, dismissals, dismissal hearings and so on, were mainly dealt with by HR,
Yes.
not at group legal.
Yes, okay.
Yes, so they would
Okay.
be ones who would be better
Yes.
positioned to answer that question.
Yes, okay,
Yes.
okay. And you don't know whether they were involved in advising on this?
I don't know.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. Mr. Mapoma, at paragraph 4 of your second affidavit at page 24, you make reference to the fact that you had then received 2 affidavits from the Commission.
Yes.
One from Ms. Mutlabi, the Group Company Secretary of Transnet, and the other from Mr. Mhlangu.
Yes,
And you've been asked to comment on them.
yes.
I just want to identify those affidavits because I'm going to cross-refer you to them in your evidence. You could please go to, keep that bundle open where it is. Now turn to bundle 1. You should have flags there, stickers. Would you turn please to flag number 2? There you find an affidavit of Ms. Mutlabi
Yes, I see that.
that deals with legal fees, and there's a whole series of annexures which we'll come to in a moment. Is that the affidavit that you received?
Yes, that is the affidavit I'm referring to that I received.
And then the affidavit of Mr. Mhlangu, could I ask you, if you have the same stickers as me, to turn to flag 4? 4 and 5 are together.
Yes,
Are you there?
yes, I am.
It's the affidavit of Mr. Mhlangu at page 169, and if you turn forward to page 172, you see that he addresses the allegations that you had made against him.
Yes,
Is this the other affidavit that you received?
yes, it is.
All right. Now, if we go back to your second affidavit, did these affidavits help you in working out the sequence of events at all?
Yes.
And how did they assist you in that regard?
Well, firstly, they would have helped me, they helped me in relation to, as to when Mr. Mhlangu would have called me. And secondly, as to the payments made for the legal costs that were referred to in the settlement agreement. And later on, I also remembered that later on, there was also another opinion that was sought in relation to the bonuses as well that I referred to in the affidavit. But
So-
I don't think I referred them to in the affidavit. I'm not sure.
What did you conclude then as to when did Mr. Mhlangu phone you?
It will have been before the settlement agreement.
And the demand from Lange attorneys?
It would have been after the settlement agreement.
Then you say at paragraph 6 that the information sought, presumably from the Commission, relates to the unsuccessful High Court application by Gama and costs relating to his unfair dismissal dispute.
Yes,
Now, at paragraph 7, and this is text that you've already given, or evidence that you've already given, I just want to take you, for the purpose of the record, to that judgment. You mention here that Mr. Gama had sued all the board members of Transnet, and there had been a defending of that action by different legal firms. Can I just take you, please, to bundle 2? Are you there?
yes, and
And could I ask you to turn to page 142?
Yes, I'm done.
So, as an advocate, you'll be familiar with this. This is a judgment extracted from SAFLI,
Yes.
and it's in the matter of Gama versus Transnet, dated the 7th of October 2009. Do you see that?
Yes, I see that.
Now, I'd like you please to go to the end of the judgment, which you find at page 162. At the foot of the page, paragraph 121, the order made by the court is, the application is dismissed with costs, including the costs of the first to third respondents and the fourth to 13th respondents, excluding the 10th and 11th respondents, such costs to include the costs of two counsel.
Yes, I see that.
And then over the page at 163, it reflects there that the first to third respondent was represented by Bowman Gilfillan attorneys, correct?
Yes,
And that the 4th to 9th and the 12th to 13th were represented by Evershed's attorneys.
yes,
Some familiar advocates involved too.
yes.
Now, at paragraphs 8 and 9 of your second affidavit, this is evidence that you've already given. You've explained to the chairperson that while Mr. Gama was supposed to pay the costs of Transnet and the board members, Transnet agreed to reverse that and pay 75% of his costs.
Yes.
And what was your view of that? I think you've already expressed it, but again, you deal with it at paragraph 9.
This was unusual. This was strange to say the least. And I found no rationality for this decision. I struggled with it. I could not find the legal basis for it. And because there was an instruction that later came verbally, I think, that the money must be paid from group legal. I then took a particular interest as to how one was going to account to auditors for this. And I was reluctant to pay it, but the instruction came that Transnet must pay the money. And this came after Mr. Langa was struggling to provide documents which are referred to in paragraph 3.6 of the settlement agreement, which would have justified Transnet paying the money. So these documents were not forthcoming, except the 55-page bill of costs, which I had rejected. So after a lot of toing and froing, correspondence, emails, telephones, and so on, then a decision was taken somewhere and given to me that Transnet, instead of it asking for Mr. Langa to bring proof of the cost that he had incurred, Transnet must then pay 75% of the tax costs of its own attorneys. In other words, Transnet deemed the costs that it incurred as costs that were liability to Mr. Langa that he would have to pay. So they must just pay him that money. This is very difficult to explain. And then after I received that instruction, being uncomfortable with it, I went to see Mr. Singh, who was the CFO at the time.
Is that Mr. Anuj Singh?
That is Mr. Anuj Singh, yes. So that he can give me the go-ahead to pay this money in the manner that I explained. And he agreed that I should pay. And then I made a note on the bills by my own handwriting at the time, and instructed my office to pay the money.
So, in terms of the settlement agreement between Transnet and Mr. Gama, Transnet had undertaken to make a contribution
Yes,
of 75% of Mr. Gama's taxed legal costs
yes,
in respect of his unsuccessful High Court application,
yes,
and another contribution of 75% of Mr. Gama's taxed legal costs in relation to the unfair dismissal dispute that he had referred to the Transnet Bargaining Council.
yes,
That's what the settlement agreement said about costs.
yes.
Now, are you saying that Mr. Gama's attorneys failed to provide supporting documents in order for Transnet to pay its contribution to Mr. Gama's legal costs in regard to the two matters in accordance with the settlement agreement?
Yes,
And because they were struggling to furnish such supporting documents, somebody within Transnet or a group of people within Transnet came up with the idea that what you must do in order to solve this problem of Mr. Gama's attorneys not being able to furnish supporting documents, what you must do is look at the legal costs that Transnet had paid to its own attorneys or to its own lawyers in regard to the two matters, and calculate 75% thereof, and then pay that amount to Mr. Gama's attorneys. Is that what you are saying?
just a little bit of correction
Yeah.
on what you're saying, Chair. Transnet had a cost order against Mr. Gama,
Yes.
which was taxed.
Yes.
This money was supposed to be paid by Mr. Gama to
Yes.
Transnet.
Yes.
So instead of him paying it to Transnet, the decision then was that 75% of that cost that was due to Transnet must then be deemed to be due to Mr. Gama and it be paid to him.
Oh, okay. So that relates, that's the cost order that had been granted by the High Court in favor of Transnet against Mr. Gama in
Yeah.
regard to the High Court application.
Yes,
That cost order had said Mr. Gama should pay Transnet's legal costs as well as the legal costs of various directors of the board of Transnet who had been cited
yes,
and had opposed his application.
yes,
So Transnet then said Transnet must calculate those costs,
yes,
which Mr. Gama was supposed to pay to them,
yes,
and then calculate 75% thereof and pay that to Mr. Gama's
Yes.
attorneys.
and that was the gist of
Oh,
it.
okay. Now
Transnet, there were two attorneys involved on Transnet's side.
yes,
Because the board members had decided to use different sets of attorneys.
yes,
So there were two attorneys now against whom Mr. Gama had to pay costs, as it were.
yes,
Yeah, because he had lost, and both attorneys for the different board members
yes,
had cost orders against him. So this is what he had to pay.
yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Mapoma, let us go through the documents and this may become clearer.
Mr. Maybeck, I just want to mention this because it's
Yes.
in my mind and you can see how you deal with it. Maybe that you deal with it later. I'm wondering whether what Transnet decided to do might have ended up giving Mr. Gama more than
Oh, absolutely.
he should have got if the settlement agreement is to be interpreted as meaning that Transnet was supposed to pay 75% of his cost to his own lawyers.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering whether this would not have ended up being much more than that.
We'll come to those figures. It certainly did, because as has been clarified, Chair, it seems that the bills of Eversheds and Bowman's were used as a proxy, really,
Yes,
for Mr. Gama's costs.
yes,
As strange as that may be, but what then happened is he was paid his costs in any case,
yes,
as we will see.
yes.
And of course, he was absolved of responsibility or
Yes.
liability of paying our costs.
Yes.
So it's really a sort of a three-way
Yeah.
issue. Mr. Mapoma, let us go to the documents. At paragraph 9, you say 3 lines from the bottom, however, I actioned it as instructed. I also refer the Commission to the handwritten notes dated 28 March are made at the time on 2 bills, one from Bowman Gilfillan and one from Eversheds. I want to go to those handwritten notes, and then your evidence might, will I think, become clearer. If you go to file 1, or bundle 1, could I ask you to turn, please, to page 93? This is an annexure to Ms. Mklabe's affidavit.
Yes, I'm there.
There is a handwritten note. Is that the note you're referring to?
That is the note I'm referring to.
Now, if you turn to page 1,
Are you talking about the handwritten annotations at page 93?
at the foot of the page, yes.
Oh, okay, all right.
Going to come back to that, Mr. Mapoma, but if you go to page 88, would you confirm that this is a bill of fees and disbursements due to Bowman Gilfillan?
Yes,
So let's go back to 93. So it had been taxed and allowed in the sum of 353,457, correct?
yes.
And what does your handwritten note say?
My handwritten note reads as follows. Transnet to pay 75%, in brackets 75% of the tax costs above. That is 75% of 353, 457.36, and I write the amount in words. And then payment has been approved as per attached memo, and in brackets discussed with Anoj, and I sign it, and there's a date of 28 March 2011.
All right. Now we'll come to that memo in a moment, but you made the same annotation. If you go over the page to page 94, there's another taxed bill in relation to Bowman Gilfillan.
Yes,
If you go to page 96, would you confirm that you made the same annotation?
yes, I
On that
I
bill.
did.
And then those are the Bowman Gilfillan documents. If you go to page 112, these are fees and disbursements due to Eversheds.
Yes, I'm there.
If I could ask you to turn forward then to page 117, we find the same annotation there. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And then over the page, another tax bill in respect of Eversheds. And if you go to page 120, we find the same annotation.
Yes, that is correct.
Now, you say in all of these annotations that you had discussed the matter with Mr. Singh.
Yes.
Is there a particular reason why you made these annotations, what you wrote at the bottom of each one of them?
Yes. Normally, attorney's bills, when they come to my office, I will not go to Mr. Singh,
Yes.
discuss them. I will not even go to my direct supervisor to discuss them.
Yes.
I had authority to make payments when payments were due to attorneys for work done. But in this particular instance, I was not happy with how this man was to be paid. And Mr. Mkonas had asked me to make this payment as I'm explaining it to you. Now, out of my unhappiness, I struggled in my mind how this can be explained to auditors. Because when auditors come, they will ask me, why this payment? So I went to him and said to him, I don't recall the particular conversation, the words, but I would have said to him, this is what my instruction is, and I'm asked to pay this money. Now, from your position as CFO, must I do this? Because when auditors come, I wanted to have somebody who is senior enough. This thing was the CFO who had agreed that this payment was made in this fashion. And I think I will have asked or told Mr. Mkonas as well that I'm going to go and ask Mr. Singh about this. He would have known about it. I would not have done it behind his back. So I had this instruction and this comfort, at least of knowing that this is what the executives approve, and I made the payment.
Okay.
So you say in your annotations that you had discussed it with Anoj, Mr. Singh, and you've explained that and why you escalated it to him. But you also talk of approval as per the attached memo.
Yes.
And this is something that you deal with at paragraph 10 of your affidavit. You say, I also refer to the memo I wrote to Mr. Singh, dated 23 March. Could I take you, please, to that memo?
Yes.
Bundle 1, the same bundle that you're in, at page 104.
Yes, I'm there.
Is that the memorandum?
That's the memorandum I'm referring to.
So it's addressed to Mr. Singh, from you dated the 23rd of March.
Yes.
Now, I want to take you to your motivation. You quote the relevant clauses from the settlement agreement, and then you deal with the financial implications.
Yes.
And you say 75% of the attached invoices have to be paid to Gama's attorneys. And then if you go down, the breakdown of costs is as follows. Talk about the South Gauteng High Court litigation. Over the page, tax costs awarded to Evershed's attorneys were X, and Transnet, in terms of the settlement agreement, must pay 75%. And then you go on to say the tax costs awarded to Bowman's were X, and in terms of the settlement agreement, Transnet must pay 75%.
Yes.
And then you say we're still awaiting the tax cost from Langa, Mr. Gama's attorneys. It's recommended that when such has been obtained, payment of 75% of these costs is also approved. And you go on to seek a recommendation that based on the motivation above, I recommend that the contribution to legal fees must be paid as per settlement agreement, and you sign that. And then, who are the signatories after that?
The signatory below mine is Ms. Stephen, and then below Ms. Stephen, it's Mr. Brian Molifa.
And what, there's a handwritten annotation there. Whose writing is that?
That is Mr. Molifa's handwriting.
And what does it say?
It says Mapoma. I do not see the need for a lecture on the PFMA, risk, and the Dennis Reed's opinion. If you don't want the agreement to leak, why do you make copies and attach it?
Was there something in the memo where you were giving a lecture on the PFMA and risk and Denise Reid's opinion?
At the page prior to that one, Chair, where we had signed, at the top of the page, this is now page 105,
Yes.
there is reference to the Public Finance Management Act.
Oh, okay.
And then below that, there's a paragraph relating to an opinion we had received.
Yes.
And then on page 104, under the heading motivation, there's a sentence that says a copy of the agreement is attached.
Okay.
Now,
Oh, I'm sorry. Is this a memo that Mr. Singh saw or would have seen before giving you a go-ahead to pay?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
you also refer to, later on in your affidavit at paragraph 12, to a memorandum that you wrote to Mr. Molefe. So we've dealt with the memorandum to Mr. Singh. The memorandum to Mr. Molefe, could I ask you please, again in bundle 1, to turn to page 142.
It's just before you
Yes.
get the councillor, I just want to bring to your attention and the chair's attention the dates on the memo that where you were referring to, is at page 106,
Yes.
and the dates on my handwritten notations as well. Because all of that would have come after the approvals that were received in that memo, if you look at the dates. But then we can go to the memo that you're referring to now.
Yes, I think the point that you make is that Mr. Molefe signs on the 28th of March, and that's the same day as your handwritten annotations. Is
Yeah.
that what you say? Fair enough. So if we then go to your memorandum to Mr. Molefe at page 142 of bundle 1, is this the memorandum?
Yes, that is the memorandum.
To Brian Molefe, Group Chief Executive, and it's CC'd to Mr. Mkhwanazi, the chairperson of the board, and it's from you, dated 17 August.
Yes.
What gave rise to this memorandum?
Let me just...
What caused you to write it?
Okay. There was a letter that was received by Transnet, by Mr. Molefe's office, from the ministry, from the public Minister of Public Enterprises, regarding the complaint that Mr. Gama had laid there about outstanding legal fees in the matter of Gama versus Transnet. So the letter would have been sent to Mr. Molefe, and a response would have been required, and Mr. Molefe asked me to draft a response for him. In fact, he asked me to explain to him first, and then later on he asked me now to draft a letter for the TPE, because I first had to explain to him what had happened so that he could answer, and then he said, no, I must draft the answer for him with the TPE.
All right, well, let's first deal with, as you say, your explanation. And to echo what you've said to the chairperson, you see at page 142, paragraph 3, it records the Director General of the Department of Public Enterprises sent a letter to the Group Chief Executive dated 16 August advising that Lange Attorneys is complaining, etc.,
Yes.
about the fees.
Yes.
Now, I want to, because things are clarified now very clearly, just deal with the heading, how were the figures calculated? You say at paragraph 6 that Mr. Gama incurred legal costs in two matters. The first is his application in the High Court, in which Transnet used two sets of attorneys, Bowman, Gilfillan and Denise Rates. Is that correct, Denise Rates?
Yes. I might be mistaken, it could have been Eversheds,
Yes.
but there were two sets of attorneys.
All right. Well, we've seen from the judgment that it was
Yes,
Evershed.
it was Eversheds. So I agree. The reference there should be to Eversheds, not Dennis Rates.
The second matter in which he incurred costs is the labour matter in which he was charged in a disciplinary process. The costs at paragraph 7 in the High Court were granted in Transnet's favour by the court. These costs were supposed to have paid by Mr. Gama. On reaching settlement with Mr. Gama, Transnet sought and obtained the tax bills from these two firms of attorneys and paid 75% of the total costs. The taxed amount included the fees of counsel, which are indicated as disbursements in the attorney's bills. The amounts of 696,000 and 319,000 were paid to Lange attorneys on 28 March 2011, being 75% of the tax costs incurred by Transnet to its attorneys.
Yes,
The total amount paid to Lange attorneys on 28 March was therefore 1,016,000.
yes,
Is that right?
that is correct.
Then you go on, perhaps you say at paragraph 8, Mr. Gama's own attorneys in both the High Court application and the labour matter was Lange attorneys. And then I think you've explained already that there were concerns about its bill.
Yes.
Is that right? Can you then pick up, please, at paragraph 9? What do you say there?
In paragraph 9, I say, after a number of meetings, during which it becomes clear that the parties will not reach agreement, Transnet instructed its legal advisors to instruct the private taxing master to tax the bill. This was done. And the total amount came to 2,293,627.68 cents. According to the taxing master, Lange attorney's consultant who drew their bill was instructed not to cooperate with the taxation process. Normally, in a taxation process, a party is usually present to justify its various costs it claims it is entitled to. If the party opts to be absent, it cannot claim to be prejudiced. Transnet then paid the sum of, I mentioned the amount, on 9 June 2011 to Lange attorneys, being 75% of the taxed costs. Now, these are in reference now to the disciplinary process.
Well, so Transnet instructs its legal advisors to instruct a private taxing master
Yes.
to tax the bill. This was done and the amount came to, as you say, 2.293 million. And then 75% of that was paid, which was 1,720,000.
Yes.
Now, did you ever see the taxing master's memorandum and the taxed bill?
I will have seen it at the time.
Let me take you, please, to bundle 2. And could I ask you to turn up page 167.
Yes, and then?
So 167 reflects a payment to Lange attorneys of 1,720,000, the same figure you refer to at paragraph 9 of your memo to Mr. Malefe, correct?
Yes, yes.
And you will see over the page at 168, there's a page of the memorandum that is stamped Transnet paid Batal.
Yes.
We then sourced the full memorandum that you see at 169. It runs all the way through to 174. Do you see that?
Yes, I see that.
And at 174, the tax consultant comes to an amount due of 2,293,000. It's the same figure that you referred to at paragraph 9 of your memo to Mr. Molefe.
Yes.
And what the consultant concludes at 19 is when the above figures are considered, kindly bear in mind that as per my instructions, I marked the bill as liberally as I thought possible, taking into consideration the difficulty of the matter, the importance to client, the fact that the agreement stated that the respondent agrees to pay payment of fees and disbursements as between attorney and own client. You see that?
Yes, I see that.
And then attached to this memorandum was the taxed bill. And it runs from page 175 through to 209. You see that?
Yes, I see that.
Did you see this at the time?
Well, I'm not sure whether it's the same one that I saw, the one that I refused to pay at the time. At this particular moment, we had asked Norton Rose, I think, to appoint the taxing master to deal with this bill, which I think they did. But I'm not sure whether I would have seen this bill. But if it was sent to my office, I would have seen it. I will not deny that I saw it, but I can't recall.
Now, if I could, I'm going to take you to the bill, but perhaps we can go back to the memorandum.
Yes.
At paragraph 3.8 at page 170. I've not allowed any travelling for the attorney to consultations with counsel. There are a number of cases that frown upon attorney charging for travelling to attend anywhere but court and only to court when the courthouse is outside of the area. Etc. But what I want to just ask you to comment on is this tax bill of costs. It certainly does include, I think, 14 days of disciplinary hearing. But it also includes the costs of the High Court litigation, doesn't it?
Can you take me to where it does that?
Well, let us start by looking at page 177 at 39, consultation with Advocate Kennedy SC. Read the letter. Advocate Kennedy, we know, represented Mr. Gama, didn't he, in the High Court proceedings? That we saw from the judgment.
Yes. Oh, yes, I see that.
And over the page at 178, 49, consultation with Advocate Kennedy. At 179, at number 71, talks about a notice to oppose the application.
Yes.
Perusal of answering affidavit. Do you see?
Yes, I see.
At 86, attend court with counsel, postponement, travelling time. And so we can go on,
Yes.
Mr. Mapoma. But this taxed bill, would you accept, deals with both the High Court litigation and Mr. Gama's disciplinary hearing?
It seems so.
And in fact, what you see in the first 7 or 8 pages of the bill, it all relates to the High Court application, because let me take you to page 192. Or in fact, page 190, right at the bottom. Remember, the High Court litigation preceded, as you know, the disciplinary hearing.
Yes, I
At 190, right at the bottom, there's then a charge for day one of the disciplinary hearing. You see that?
Is that at page 191,
Sorry, 190.
190?
Yes, I see that.
Oh, yeah.
And then those are in bold. One can track them at 191, the second day, the third day, the fourth day, over the page, the fifth day, and so it goes on.
Yes, they're in bold, yes.
In bold. And I think, if my memory serves me correctly, it goes up to the 14th day at page 194.
Yes, I see that.
So, then let me ask you, is this then in summary what happened? Firstly, Mr. Gama is absolved of his liability of paying costs to two different sets of attorneys in the High Court litigation.
Yes,
Secondly, what happens is Transnet pays 75% of the costs that he incurs for that litigation in the High Court.
yes,
And then on top of that, Transnet pays him 75% of the costs that Transnet and Transnet's directors incurred in the High Court.
yes. I see that.
In relation to this payment of Mr. Gama's tax costs, 1.7 million, initially in your evidence you said that that related to his disciplinary hearing.
Yes,
Now we know it relates also to the High Court.
I see that, yes.
Was that paid by mistake, or did you intend to pay this?
It should have been a mistake,
A mistake.
yes. Could not have been paid intentionally.
Did the mistake relate to the disciplinary hearing costs?
Yes, because then it means there's a duplication now.
Yes.
Yes,
Well, why do you say duplication?
because the high costs matter.
Yeah.
The costs thereof are also being paid again now. They are also included in the 1.7 million,
Yeah.
because the 1.7 million arises from this tax bill.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay, I'm not sure if I understand. I want to make sure I do. Well, there is the question, and I don't know whether Mr. Mybeck was asking about that or whether he's still going to deal with it, is the question of whether, in terms of the settlement agreement, Transnet undertook any liability in relation to Mr. Gama's costs relating to the disciplinary hearing. There is that aspect.
yes.
Are you able to say what your understanding was of whether the settlement agreement included Mr. Gama's costs relating to the disciplinary hearing?
Yes, my understanding was that it included Mr. Gama's costs at the labor hearing, at the disciplinary hearing.
Yes, that was your understanding.
Yes,
So as far as to the extent that the tax bill related to those costs, you had no problem.
to the extent that, yes, I did not have a problem.
Okay, all right.
Yes, because that is what the settlement agreement sought to achieve.
Yes, well,
Yeah.
we will talk about that in due course. But I just want to understand the duplication to which you are referring.
Because the previous payments that council referred to, where I had made return notes by my own hand,
Yeah,
were costs that Transnet incurred in reference to the High Court matter.
yes,
For the two
okay.
attorneys,
Right, that's
perhaps.
1.7.
Yes,
Yeah,
and then Gama was paid that money.
yes,
And then later on, there's this bill now, which then gets
Coming
taxed.
from Langa attorneys.
Coming from Langa attorneys,
Yeah,
then it gets sent to our attorneys, then they send it to the taxing master,
yes.
to the private taxing master,
Yes.
who then taxes it.
Yes.
And this bill includes both the disciplinary hearing and the High Court matters.
Oh, okay. So that's where you say now this is a duplication.
Yes,
But of course, I take it that their bill is based on Mr. Gama's costs. Or is
yes,
supposed to be based on Mr. Gama's costs, whereas the amount that you paid them, that you had already paid them, was based on Transnet's own legal costs.
yes,
Yes, okay. So the point you were making to council was that the payment of of Langa attorney's bill was a mistake.
it should be mistaken in the
It
mail.
should not have been
It
paid.
should never have been paid.
Yes, okay, Mr. Mybeck. Now I understand the duplication, where it comes from.
Perhaps I can just pick up on the chairperson's questioning. You understood the settlement agreement to provide that Transnet undertook to pay 75% of Mr. Gama's costs incurred during the disciplinary hearing.
Yes, this was my understanding.
Can we go to page 19 of bundle 3? It's the settlement agreement attached to your first affidavit. So there is a reference there to tax costs.
I'm sorry, which bundle?
Bundle 3.
3.
Yes.
Okay, and what page?
Chairperson, page 19, 19.
19. Okay, yes.
There's reference to tax legal costs incurred during the High Court, this is at 3.5,
Yes, and that-
application, and in respect of his unfair dismissal dispute referred to the Transnet Bargaining Council.
Yes.
How do you interpret that to mean you would pay his costs of the disciplinary inquiry?
Because the referral to the bargaining council did not happen. I mean, did not,
No, it did happen.
I don't know how to put this thing.
That's what was settled.
Yes, it was settled in the sense that there was no, according to what I knew at the time, there was no hearing or anything like that. They settled it. It was
Yes,
settled.
that's why I should have got very little costs.
So our understanding at the time, my understanding, I think this was the understanding of Transnet at the time, was that it referred to the disciplinary hearing that led to that
But where does
referral.
it say that, Mr. Mapoma? It talks about unfair dismissal dispute referred to the Transnet Bargaining Council. And we're talking about tax costs.
Yes,
You tax costs in legal proceedings, right?
yes.
Have you ever heard of tax costs in a disciplinary hearing?
No,
So how do you get to that interpretation?
because this is why there was this problem. One of the problems was this, because they could not provide or agree that those costs in that disciplinary hearing must be taxed, was they had to present these documents to us to say, or for us to go to jointly to a taxing master to tax whatever cost that they said they incurred there. And this is what they were not coming forth with, that these tax costs at the disciplinary hearing.
You don't tax the costs of a disciplinary hearing.
Yes.
Do you? I mean, who taxes them?
Nobody.
Precisely. So how do you land up paying the man for 14 days of a disciplinary hearing?
This is the instruction that was there
By who?
by the Board of Transnet. This is what Mafika Mkonas said to me must be done. Yes.
Was that your own interpretation, or is that what he told you to do?
It was what he told me to do, and this is how I understand the board interpreted it. Because when Gama's attorney, Mr. Langa, presented this thing to me first time, the first question that one asks is, it must be taxed. Because I remember saying to him, Mr. Gama had been dismissed for ignoring a board instruction. So he has a settlement agreement now that the board has entered into, referring us to a taxation that must happen. And how do you expect me to go and pay fees that had not been taxed anyway. So that was the first hurdle that Langa could not jump with me. It was these bills would not be taxed or were not taxed anyway. So all our problems started from there. But then the understanding was that the payment must be for the cost that he incurred at the disciplinary hearing.
You say understanding of who?
The board, me, and those who instructed me at the time.
When you look at that clause now, do you still have the same understanding, or has your understanding changed as to whether the settlement agreement included payment by Transnet of Mr. Gama's costs in relation to the disciplinary hearing?
So that is not what it says when you look at it, even at the time.
No.
But the point is, at the time, the only disciplinary hearing that had happened for Mr. Gama before the bargaining council was the disciplinary.
Okay, let's take this step by step. Okay, it's the relevant clause of the settlement agreement is 3.5. Have you got it in front of you? Okay. The first part deals with the High Court legal costs, and the second part deals with the unfair dismissal dispute costs. So it reads, Transnet will make a contribution equivalent to 75% of Mr. Gama's tax legal costs incurred during Gama's High Court application. So that we leave that. That's not what we are dealing with now. And then it says, and in respect of his unfair dismissal dispute referred to the Transnet Bargaining Council. Now, the costs relating to the second part of the clause, do you agree, relate to an unfair dismissal dispute? Do you agree that the unfair dismissal dispute to which they relate is one that was referred to the bargaining council? Do you accept or do you not accept that therefore the costs that are contemplated there are costs that would have begun around when the dismissal dispute was referred to the bargaining council? You accept that? Now, the dispute, unfair dismissal dispute, was only referred to the bargaining council after Mr. Gama had been dismissed, isn't it?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, Chairperson, I've been asked just to ask Mr. Mapoma to put his mic on.
Oh, okay, yeah. I wonder how much was not captured.
Apparently the answer wasn't captured.
Okay, we'll just start again. Okay, you accept that this clause, insofar as it relates to costs concerning the unfair dismissal dispute, relates to the unfair dismissal dispute that was referred to the Transnet Bargaining Council.
I accept.
You accept that. Do you also accept that those costs could only have arisen around when that dispute was referred to the bargaining council?
I accept that too.
Do you also accept that this unfair dismissal dispute could only have been referred to the bargaining council after Mr. Gama had been dismissed?
Yes, I do.
And do you accept that Mr. Gama was dismissed at the end of June 2010?
Yes.
Therefore, costs relating to the disciplinary hearing, which happened before the actual dismissal happened, before the dismissal dispute arose, could not be included. Do you also accept that?
Yes.
You accept that now?
Yes.
That should then lead to, and you must tell me if my understanding of your evidence is wrong, that should then lead us to a position where you say this understanding is different from the understanding you had at the time, because at the time, as I understand your evidence, your understanding was that the cost that Mr. Gama had incurred before being dismissed in regard to the display hearing were included in the settlement agreement.
Yes, Chair.
You accept?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Maibek?
Thank you. I just want to ask you one or two questions around that. How did you rationalize that in your own mind? Mr. Gama was put through a disciplinary hearing and he was dismissed. There was then a settlement agreement where he got a final written warning. How did you rationalize him being reimbursed for the entire cost of his disciplinary hearing?
The decision to pay Mr. Gama's
Yes.
costs, which he incurred, firstly was not mine. So it was not for me to rationalize or not rationalize it.
Right.
I refused to pay Mr. Gama's costs for a number of reasons. Some of them I've told you. I think I've told
Please
you.
face this side, Mr. Mapoma.
Oh, sorry, my apologies.
Yeah, I know he's asking
Yes.
I asked the questions, you answer them to
No, no, my apologies, my apologies.
Yeah.
I'm saying the decision to make the payment was not mine, for me to rationalize or not to rationalize. I refused to pay this cost for a number of reasons, some of them which I've set out before the chair today. And the instruction that I had at the time was that I should pay the costs from the time of the disciplinary hearing, because this is what Transnet wanted to do. So I agree that there's no rationality for this. Even at the time, I saw no rationality for it.
That was the instruction.
Sorry, John?
That was the instruction.
That was the instruction. It was known. My stance on this fees was known by many people, and but I ended up paying them from my group legal fees.
Yes, but are you saying that your understanding of the settlement agreement was in accordance with the understanding of those who were giving instructions?
Yes, that's
Yes.
what I'm saying.
Okay.
I first refused even to pay them from group legal,
Yes.
because I was arguing that it was HR who was supposed to pay this cost because they'd been dealing with the disciplinary hearing,
Yes.
because this was going to include the disciplinary hearing. I said,
Yeah.
no, but why must they come to me? But my complaints and protestations fell into deaf ears because I was refusing to pay this money.
Okay.
All right, so we had,
Were you ever asked by the board or Mr. Mkwanazi or anybody as to your opinion of whether the settlement agreement in terms of the costs relating to the unfair dismissal included costs relating to the disciplinary hearing? Were you asked for your advice or opinion whether it did, or were you not asked?
I don't recall.
You don't recall?
I don't recall
Okay, all right.
that particularity. I don't recall.
all right, we were dealing with paragraph 12 of your second affidavit. That's at page 100, sorry, not 100, page 26 of bundle 3. And you had dealt with the memorandum that you sent to Mr. Malefe. If you go to page 144, you see you signed it and then he signed it on the 24th of August.
That's page 144,
144, yes.
of volume, bundle 2,
Bundle 3,
bundle 3.
yes.
Yes, I see that.
In fact, I'm hopelessly out. It's actually bundle 1, I beg your pardon.
Oh, okay. Okay, I've got bundle 1. Okay, and the page is 144.
Yes, Chairperson.
Okay. Yes.
So the signatures appear at 144, is that correct?
Yes, I see that, yes.
If we go back to 139, There's some handwritten notes at 139. Whose notes are those?
And 139 is the handwritten notes are at 141 on my bundle.
141?
Yes, 141.
Yes. Handwritten notes. Whose handwritten notes are those?
There are different people who wrote here. The handwritten notes at the top, the first ones, is my handwriting. The second written,
Are you referring to the ones that have got 1, 2, 3?
yes,
Okay, that's your handwriting.
that's my handwriting. And then that's my handwriting again as to when I received this. I would have received it from Mr. Molefe's office, that is now the file cover itself. And there are comments underneath there, under the word comments, and the name Sachs, that is Mr. Molefe's handwriting. And then the last comments,
Was Sachs a reference to you?
Sachs refers to me.
Okay.
That's how I'm commonly known. You just missed my spelling there. Yes, and then the last handwritten note, I recognize that signature, but I'm not sure. It looks like this was Miss Phyllis Tifeto's handwriting. Phyllis Tifeto was an executive in Mr. Molefe's office.
In whose office?
Mr. Molefe's office.
Oh, okay. So the DG at DPE who had made inquiries was Mr. Madonna?
Yes, it was Mr. Madonna at the time.
Yeah, okay.
Did you then draft a response for Mr. Molefe?
Yes, I did.
Could I ask you please to turn to page 147?
Yes, I see that.
Is this the draft that you prepared?
This is a draft that I prepared, but when I look at it now, I think it was amended, and I've got two reasons why I say so. The actual draft that I sent is not this one. The reason I say it was amended is, firstly, at page 147, at the bottom, there is a reference to, there's a paragraph that reads, Langa attorneys have had several communications, both written and oral, with Transnet's attorneys in an attempt to resolve the issue. There is also further communication, both written and oral, between Langa attorneys and the office of Ms. Sola Stephen, Group Executive Corporate Affairs, the executive responsible for legal affairs at Transnet. Firstly, it is because of that paragraph, and because of the handwritten notes at the bottom again of the same document, which states or reads, amended after Zola advised that she met Mr. Gama, and they agreed that Mr. Gama will provide further information which he said he had, and then they agreed to have a meeting after 19 August when Zola came back from leave. I was not privy to any communication between Mr. Langa or Mr. Gama, between them and Ms. Stephen, so I would not have included that paragraph there. And while the handwritten notes, I don't know whose handwritten note is that. There's no signature that I recognize. So it's clear that the draft that I would have sent to Mr. Molefe was then subsequently amended because of the introductions that are recorded there.
Are you able to say whether this memo represents the draft that you had prepared, except for the paragraph that you have read and the handwritten notes?
It would have captured the draft that I prepared to an extent.
Yeah, the substance of it.
Substance of it.
Okay.
The second last paragraph at page 148. Mr. Gama's own attorneys in both the High Court application and the labour matter was Langa attorneys. When Transnet received their bill being presented for payment, it became apparent that the bill hadn't been taxed. And then you go on to say the draft records. that a private taxing master was appointed. Was that paragraph I read to you, is that your own original language? You remember?
I think it is.
So it says, Mr. Gama's own attorneys in both High Court application and labour matter was Lange. When Transnet received their bill for what?
For payment.
Yes, but in respect of what, Mr. Mapoma?
Was the bill that I had received from Lange, was the only one that I was refusing to pay. That's the only bill that I know that I had at the time.
But that bill, it included the costs of the High Court proceedings and the disciplinary inquiry.
If it is the same one as this, I agree.
I just want you to assist me with something that I should have asked earlier while Mr. Mybeck is looking at his next question. You said earlier on that ultimately Transnet made a duplication in terms of payment to Lange attorneys because Transnet paid Lange attorneys in terms of the calculations they made based on their own legal costs, but also when Lange attorneys sent their bill, ultimately there was a payment based on a calculation of on the basis of that bill.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Roughly, what was the total of the two payments?
Are you
able to?
I can't remember.
Okay, I'm sure it is somewhere. I thought you might recall more or less.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I can't.
Okay. All right. And did Lange attorneys not return some of the money and say, no, you have paid us twice?
Not to my knowledge.
Yes. Okay.
Well, the sum of the two amounts paid to Mr. Gama, or his attorneys, was approximately 2.3 million. Correct.
I accept.
I want to go to your second affidavit again and ask you to have a look at page 27, in paragraph 15. You say, in paragraph 35 of my first affidavit, I stated the following: when I left Transnet, the legal fees of Mr. Gama had not yet been paid. Further, when I left Transnet, I had not approved such payments.
I'm sorry, are you back to his affidavit?
Yes, Chair, at bundle 3,
Okay.
page 27.
Can I answer?
Okay, page 27.
I've just read to the witness, Chair, paragraph 15.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Paragraph 16, you say, when I so stated, I was referring to any further payments that might have been made in respect of legal fees, over and above what is reflected in the memoranda attached to Mhlapi's affidavit. Are you aware of a payment that was made subsequently?
Yes,
Another payment?
Yes, I know. After I had left Transnet, I was advised that there was another payment that was made to Mr. Gama, Mr. Lange.
Purporting to be a contribution to his legal costs?
Yes.
Oh. Okay. Did you get to know about how much that was?
No,
You didn't?
I did not even make the inquiry.
Yeah.
I just...
Yeah, you had no interest in
I had
this
no
stage.
interest in the matter.
Yeah.
Perhaps, just for the sake of completeness, and another witness will deal with this, could I ask you, please, to turn in bundle 2 to page 211.
Yes, I'm there.
210 and 211 reflect a payment in 2015 of an amount of 1,399,000. Do you see that?
Yes, I see that.
And at 213, there was a memorandum in support of that.
Yes, I see that.
It was compiled, you see, at 215 by Mr. Salinga and then approved by Mr. Singh. But presumably, you have no knowledge of that.
No, I don't.
But you left Transnet by that time.
Yes, I left by that time.
Then, if we go to back to your affidavit, page 28. You now deal
I'm
with
sorry,
this.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mybeck. This is something I hadn't picked up before about this third payment. So another payment of more than 1 million rand was made in 2015.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, that's okay.
And you will see, Chairperson, at 213, that it relates to the same settlement agreement.
Yes.
There's a quotation of clause 3.5,
Yes.
and there's a discussion that, if you go to paragraph 6,
Yes.
that a certain amount was paid, and then there was a deduction, and then there's a balance, and then interest is payable at 15.5%, and that then takes one to 1.4 million. But we will have to bring someone
Yes.
to give
okay.
evidence in an attempt to decode this.
Yeah.
Chair, I see that it's 1 minute past 1.
Yes. Let's take the lunch adjournment. We'll resume at 2 o'clock. We adjourn.
All rise.